In Congress, Ivanka Trump mocks the name Crockett and tears at Jasmine's family legacy. The insult cuts deep broadcast to millions, but Jasmine rises. Armed with history and truth, she unleashes a blow no amount of money can silence. Can Jasmine Crockett's truth bring Ivanka Trump to her knees? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The Capitol chamber burned with white lights, cameras circling like vultures every second, broadcast to millions of Americans holding their breath. The banner on the wall read, "American Legacy and Political Ethics." It was not paperwork, it was a battlefield. At the witness table sat Jasmine Crockett, the young congresswoman from Texas. No fancy jewels, no golden shield, only the quiet strength of a woman raised by a working-class family. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw locked. She carried with her the pride of sweat sacrifice, and a name written in blood, not money. Opposite her, Ivanka Trump glided in white dress, blazing under the lights, her presence dripping with privilege. She was the heir of towers and trademarks, the face of a dynasty that bought its place in history. The cameras zoomed in. The air turned electric. Everyone knew one word could shatter the room. The air was razor-sharp silence, trembling in the chamber after the opening stillness. Then Ivanka leaned forward, lips curled in a smile that was more blade than charm. She didn't waste time. Crockett sounds more like a cowboy bar than the name of a member of Congress. Her words cracked through the air like a whip. Gasps broke the silence. A ripple of laughter came from the Republican side, low and cutting. Faces tightened, reporters' pens scratched furiously. All eyes locked on Jasmine, but she didn't blink. Ivanka's voice sharpened, each syllable like steel slicing across the room. This country does not need names borrowed from Western folklore. We need leaders with a global vision. The chamber vibrated with murmurs, the tension climbing higher. A senator coughed, someone else whispered, but the weight of the insult hung heavy. Cameras zoomed in, locking on Jasmine's face. She sat perfectly still, calm, like a loaded gun not yet fired. But Ivanka wasn't finished. She clicked her remote, and on the towering screen behind her, glossy slides lit up. Trump Tower, Trump International Hotel, a golden skyline of power. She raised her chin, pride dripping from her words. This is real legacy, monuments that stand, brands that conquer the globe. Not some old names echoing from a dusty classroom. Her voice dripped with disdain, her smile daring Jasmine to answer. The crowd stirred, the clash now undeniable. The camera cut to Jasmine. Her hand brushed lightly against the red folder resting on the table. She stood slowly, every move deliberate, the chamber falling silent under her rise. Her voice was steady, carried by conviction. My mother was a teacher in Texas. She told her students that the name Crockett stood for justice, for sacrifice, for something greater than wealth. The words landed like hammers, plain but unshakable, each one building pressure in the room. Reporters froze mid-scribble, sensing the storm about to break. Jasmine placed her hand on the folder, then opened it with calm precision. The sound of paper sliding free echoed louder than the whispers. She raised a document, the seal of the Library of Congress stamped clear. Her eyes locked on Ivanka. And today I show you this. My family is a direct descendant of Davy Crockett, hero of the Alamo. The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, chairs scraping as senators surged with energy. Reporters leapt from their seats, cameras flashing like lightning. Hashtags began firing across the digital world, a tidal wave already forming outside the walls. The first explosion had come, and the Capitol shook with it. The chamber was still trembling from Jasmine's declaration, but Ivanka's eyes burned hotter now. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a sharp growl that cut across the noise. Alamo hero, she snapped, her words ringing with disdain. Do not confuse a beautiful memory with the real ability to lead a nation. The audience froze. The smugness was gone. This was Ivanka striking back like a blade, her tone designed to wound. A hush fell, reporters leaning so close their pens almost tore the page. She lowered her voice, each word hammered out with surgical force. History inspires, she said, pausing between the syllables, so the weight pressed harder, but history does not feed an economy. History does not secure a border. History does not pay the soldiers who keep us safe. The chamber shook with the rhythm of her attack. Senators shifted in their seats, some nodding, others glaring. It was not just an insult anymore. It was a challenge daring Jasmine to defend the relevance of her bloodline against the machinery of modern power. Then, with a snap of her fingers on the remote, the giant screen behind her came alive. Charts blazed in bright color numbers soaring upward. Trump Tower glittered in the background, skyscrapers like monuments of steel. Ivanka's voice rose, commanding every corner of the room. Look at this. The Trump Organization has created tens of thousands of jobs. We are talking about paychecks in real American homes. We are talking about construction workers, hotel staff, engineers, managers, people who feed their families because of this name. She jabbed her finger toward the screen. This is true legacy, millions of dollars, thousands of families supported. Not a single line in a history book. The Republican side of the chamber stirred emboldened. A few senators clapped their hands, echoing in the marble dome. Others smirked openly, proud of Ivanka's counterpunch. Reporters from conservative outlets pounded their keyboards headlines already taking shape Trump jobs with. Crockett legends. The energy tilted, the atmosphere teetered on the edge of a new battle. Ivanka leaned back slightly, her chin raised, her expression carved in victory. But across the table, Jasmine didn't move. The cameras zoomed in, desperate to catch even a flicker of doubt. None came. Her face was stone, her eyes steady as steel. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it landed like a cannon. Money can buy towers, she said, her gaze locked on Ivanka, but money cannot buy sacrifice. The words sliced the air, sharp and final, a simple truth that rippled through the room. The chamber erupted again, this time with shouts and murmurs, splitting down the aisle. Clips hit social media instantly, feeds lighting up with fury and fire. Some hailed Ivanka's reality check. Others replayed Jasmine's line again and again, calling it the dagger that pierced through wealth. The nation was divided, and the clash had just reached its boiling point. The roar of divided voices still echoed when Ivanka's expression hardened. She leaned forward, eyes blazing, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Who is your mother?" she snapped, her words venomous. "A small-town teacher. Her name is in no history book. Crockett is nothing more than a borrowed legend." The cruelty landed like a strike to the gut, and the chamber gasped. Some senators whispered in disbelief, others leaned back uncomfortable with the naked personal attack. Reporters nearly dropped their pens, shocked at the audacity of the insult. The murmurs swelled. A few on the Republican side smirked, their satisfaction obvious, while many in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was a line crossed, and everyone felt it. Cameras zoomed tight on Jasmine's face, waiting to catch a flinch, a crack, anything. But she sat perfectly still, her hands calm, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence was unbearable, as if the entire country held its breath for her reply. Then Jasmine moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the red folder before her. The sound of the latch clicking open cut through the noise like thunder. She drew out documents stamped with official seals. Holding them high, her voice rang steady and unshaken. "This is a certificate from the Texas Historical Commission," she declared, lifting the page so the cameras could capture every line. "And this is testimony from the Library of Congress." Gasps rolled across the chamber, and reporters scrambled to capture the proof. The balance of power shifted in an instant. Jasmine stepped to the screen at the front of the chamber. Her hand slid another document from the folder, but this time it was more than paper. With a nod, she signaled the staffer. The projector hummed, and an image filled the wall, a black and white photograph, dated and stamped. The picture showed her mother standing tall beside a well-known black congressman at a rally marking the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. The caption at the bottom was unmistakable: Dallas Morning News 1995. The chamber exploded. Senators shot to their feet, their applause crashing like a wave against the marble walls. Journalists shouted over one another, cameras flashing like lightning. The air vibrated with energy, the proof undeniable, the insult obliterated. For the first time, Ivanka froze. Her lips parted, her eyes darted to the image, her breath catching in her throat. For one long moment, she was silent, caught in the vice of truth. But pride clawed her back. She straightened her shoulders, forcing steel into her voice, though it trembled beneath the surface. "Beautiful," she spat, her jaw tight. "But politics is not a museum. The words rang hollow, a desperate strike against the tidal wave already crashing down. The damage was done, and everyone in the room knew it. After the photo detonated, Ivanka steadied herself. She lifted her chin, reclaiming the floor with icy control, and let her words swing like a hammer. My family has negotiated with world leaders, built a global brand. Your family, a 30-year-old photo in Dallas gasps, snapped through the chamber as the insult reloaded the tension. Ivanka didn't flinch. She pressed harder, framing the moment as past versus power. Jasmine stayed motionless at the table, every camera glued to her face, waiting for a crack that never came. Ivanka leaned in, voice low and unyielding, each syllable pressed like a fingerprint on glass. Americans can't eat memories. They need leaders who create jobs today. The line hit like a cold front, cutting through applause lines and sentiment. Several senators nodded. Aides traded quick looks. The gallery murmured. It wasn't just a taunt, it was a dare demanding that history defend itself against paychecks and payrolls. The silence felt like a fuse still burning. Then she snapped the remote and the screen erupted in color bars, lines, projections roaring across the wall. Ivanka pointed, her voice climbing above the hum of the projector. Look at these numbers. The Trump organization has created tens of thousands of jobs. She paced a step, eyes sweeping the dais. This is true legacy, millions of dollars, thousands of families paid. Not a single line in a history book. The Republican side stirred, chairs scraped, hands struck together in crisp, confident claps. Jasmine rose at last, calm as a locked door, and the room tilted toward her. She didn't reach for theatrics. She reached for the one thing that cannot be bought. If jobs are built on exploitation, if a brand is built on tax fraud, then that is not legacy, it is the trafficking of power. The sentence cracked through the marble like a fault line. Reporters jolted upright. Producers shouted into headsets. Red lights bloomed on cameras. CNN and MSNBC cut live highlights in seconds, the quote stamped across the lower third like a verdict. Within minutes, the media battlefield exploded and split along a jagged seam. Fox News fired back with a chyron that read, Jasmine Crockett disdains American business. Conservative feeds surged with a tight, triumphant clip titled, Trump creates jobs, looping Ivanka's charts in applause. On the other side, Jasmine's line, the trafficking of power, rocketed across timelines, spliced over footage of towers and tax headlines. Comments turned into trenches, shares into artillery. The whole country pulled into the crossfire. The chamber buzzed like a live wire, and the nation braced for the next hit. Amid the media crossfire and flashing chyrons, Jasmine reached for the final page. She unfolded a parchment-thick record, stamped with the Texas State Library's seal, the ink still dark and unforgiving. The genealogical chart ran like a staircase through time, names linked by careful pen strokes and notarized margins. A legal description followed metes and bounds, identifying a parcel donated by her ancestors for a Dallas public school. She held it up, the camera lights catching every embossed letter, and the room leaned in, as if gravity itself had shifted. She slid out another document, a local report dated 2003, its executive summary underlined in blue. It named the campus, listed enrollment surges, and cited scholarship figures tied to that land. The text recorded thousands of low-income children gaining classrooms, teachers, and a future otherwise out of reach. Clipped to the back was a principal's letter praising a century of community investment that no skyscraper could rival. You could feel the chamber's pulse slow, then sharpen. Jasmine stepped closer to the mic, the paper steady in her hand, the evidence heavier than stone. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. My family did not leave golden towers. My family left knowledge. The sentence hit the marble like a bell, clean and undeniable. A senator rubbed his eyes. Another swallowed hard. The gallery stirred with the hush that precedes a standing quake. The tremor arrived as scattered applause transformed into a rolling surge. But Ivanka sprang forward, refusing the tide. Her chin lifted and her words came fast, clipped and fierce. Schools do not save an economy. They do not secure the border. They do not fight the enemy. The lines cracked loud but thin around the edges like glass, suddenly remembering its fragility. She pressed on, but her voice wavered, the earlier gleam dulled by the weight of what could not be bought. The echo of Ivanka's last wavering line still hung in the dome. Ivanka sat rigid, shoulders squared, but sinking the muscles in her jaw locked tight. Her hands clasped on the table knuckles, pale as if holding back a tremor she could not hide. Pride flickered in her eyes, but the flame was gone, replaced by the hard gloss of denial. She stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the screen, refusing to look at Jasmine. The room watched her in a heavy hush that felt like a verdict. Jasmine did not press the advantage. She eased back into her chair, the red folder closed her breast steady and even. No taunt, no smile, no victory pose, only a calm that said the work was done. Her gaze stayed forward, soft, but unbroken like a lighthouse after a storm. The silence around her became a kind of shield, clean and unshowy. It told the country everything without a single extra word. The gavel knocked once sharp as a snap of bone, and the chair rose. The chamber tilted toward the dais as if pulled by a tide. The chair's voice was measured, solemn, final. True legacy is not measured by towers or balance sheets, but by what we leave to the next generation. The sentence rang through the chamber, clean and steady, without spin or heat. It settled on every desk, every camera lens, every watching face. The cameras moved in on Jasmine, inch by inch, until the frame was only her eyes and the shoreline of her posture. Light traced her features. Sweat and glare had no hold on her. The feed carried that image out of the chamber and across the nation into living rooms and waiting rooms and phone screens. No caption could improve it. No commentary could blunt it. In that close-up, she was what the country wanted to see: a clear witness, a steady hand. In that close-up, she became the symbol of justice and truth. The hearing was over, but the firestorm had only just begun. The next morning, headlines screamed from every front page. The legacy war blared across the New York Times. The Washington Post called it a duel between gold and blood. CNN looped the footage of Jasmine holding up her family records, while MSNBC's Kyron read Crockett versus Trump legacy on trial. Even Fox News, desperate to defend Ivanka, could not ignore the scale of what had unfolded. The clash was no longer a hearing, it was a battle etched into the national memory. In Texas, the reaction was immediate and electric. News stations ran specials about Davy Crockett, the Alamo, and the modern descendants Jasmine had revealed on the floor of Congress. Schools across Dallas and Houston began revisiting their civic history modules, teachers requesting archival material about the Crockett family donation to education. Parents told their children stories not of towers or fortunes, but of sacrifice and service. Local historians dusted off files long buried, eager to trace the land donation Jasmine cited. Within days, classrooms across Texas were teaching students about the Crockett lineage as an example of how ordinary families could shape extraordinary futures. Pride swelled through the Lone Star State. Veterans walked into diners and told their neighbors, "That Congresswoman is one of us." Teachers stood before assemblies and quoted Jasmine's line, "We don't leave towers, we leave knowledge." The words traveled beyond textbooks. They became spoken promises, reminders of a heritage that belonged not to the powerful, but to the people. Talk shows seized on the spectacle, dissecting every angle. On The View, the panel hailed Jasmine as the Congresswoman who turned insult into history. CNN's evening anchor declared she transformed humiliation into a weapon of truth. It was not only a rebuttal, it was a reckoning. MSNBC went further, calling it the most devastating counterpunch in modern congressional hearings. Even late-night comedians who thrived on satire could not escape the gravity of her words. They mocked Ivanka's school's "Don't Save an Economy" line, but the laughter was hollow. It carried with it the sting of disbelief at how tone-deaf her attack had been. The soundbite of the week belonged to Jasmine. Networks replayed it with reverence. Money can buy towers, but money cannot buy sacrifice. The clip went viral, not as entertainment, but as an anthem. People who had never tuned into politics watched it replayed, it shared it with their families. It had the rhythm of a truth too simple to ignore, too sharp to dismiss. More powerful still was the response of ordinary Americans. Teachers posted online that their work was finally being recognized as legacy. One wrote, "We don't build skyscrapers, but we build minds." Nurses held up photos in scrubs, reminding the public that lives saved were worth more than dollars earned. Veterans uploaded black and white pictures from their service days, captioning them with pride. Our legacy is written in uniform, not in gold. These were not politicians, not moguls, but the quiet engine of America claiming their part of the story. It wasn't long before the phrase, "Every American carries a piece of the nation's legacy," surfaced everywhere. A Baptist preacher used it in his Sunday sermon. A rabbi echoed it during Sabbath service. A Catholic school in Houston painted it across its gymnasium wall. College professors wrote it on chalkboards to begin their classes, sparking discussions about the nature of legacy and sacrifice. The idea traveled faster than any campaign slogan. Could it resonated because it was earned, not bought. Newspapers ran editorials that framed the battle as a turning point. "True legacy does not glitter, it endures," wrote one columnist. "It is carved in classrooms, in hospitals, on battlefields, in courtrooms. It is not measured in the height of towers, but in the depth of service." Op-ed pages filled with testimony from ordinary citizens recounting their own family histories. Farmers who built schools, mothers who raised generations, workers who carried towns on their backs. America had been handed a mirror, and in it people began to see not the wealthy dynasties on magazine covers, but themselves. For Ivanka, the fallout was merciless. Her words delivered with confidence during the hearing now looped as evidence of arrogance. Clips of her saying, "Schools do not save an economy. They do not secure the border. They do not fight the enemy," were replayed not with applause but with disbelief. Editorials blasted her as the woman who insulted history. Conservative outlets tried to defend her, but the soundbite refused to die. Memes flooded the internet, splicing her comments against footage of crumbling Trump properties, unpaid workers, and tax fraud headlines. For the first time, Ivanka's carefully polished image cracked beyond repair. The Trump brand had always been sold as resilience, as power wrapped in gold. But here it was shown as brittle, tone-deaf, dismissive of sacrifice. Ivanka had not just lost an argument, she had revealed a void, a hollowness beneath the shine. To millions, she was no longer the untouchable heiress, but the symbol of privilege sneering at the nation's backbone. Jasmine, meanwhile, rose higher than anyone could have predicted. The press no longer described her as merely a young congresswoman from Texas. They called her the voice of ordinary America. Profiles of her family appeared in major outlets, tracing her lineage, not just to Davy Crockett, but to the teachers, workers, and community leaders who carried his legacy forward. Time magazine placed her on its cover with the headline, "The New Face of Legacy." Young activists cited her as proof that truth could still triumph in a system weighted by money. High school debate teams studied her responses line by line. Law professors assigned the hearing as a case study in rhetoric and evidence. And across the country, ordinary people felt that for once their lives, their families, their quiet sacrifices had been honored on the national stage. The lesson from the clash spread like wildfire. Wealth may build towers, but sacrifice builds nations. Parents repeated it to their children at dinner tables. Teachers wrote it on whiteboards. Coaches drilled it into teams before practice. The hearing had birthed not only a political moment, but a cultural mantra. For Ivanka, the damage compounded. She became shorthand for arrogance in talk radio monologues, the butt of bitter jokes in late-night sketches, the subject of cartoons depicting her clutching towers while history swept past her. Her once carefully curated image as the polished diplomat of the Trump family was reduced to rubble. Political strategists whispered that her presidential aspirations, once floated, were now dead on arrival. But Jasmine's stature grew. She was invited onto primetime interviews not as a guest but as a moral authority. She spoke not of victory, but of duty, reminding Americans that the fight was not hers alone. "This was never about me," she said in one interview. "It was about reminding us all what we owe to each other. Legacy is not a trophy, it's a responsibility." The impact ran deeper than politics. Communities began hosting legacy nights in town halls, where residents shared their family histories. Museums requested Jasmine's red folder for an exhibit. Schools created essay competitions asking students to define their family's legacy. The phrase, "Our legacy too," became a unifying call across towns and cities. America had not just watched a clash, it had been given a story it could claim. Jasmine had walked into the hearing facing ridicule. She walked out carrying a nation. Her calm, her evidence, her restraint in not humiliating Ivanka when she could have elevated her above the noise. She became a vessel for something larger, the idea that legacy was not monopolized by wealth. It was owned by everyone who had ever sacrificed, built, or given something back. And so while Ivanka sat in silence as her public image crumbled, Jasmine's face was broadcast coast to coast as the symbol of justice and truth. Schools taught her words. Families repeated her lessons. Citizens lifted their own histories into the light. The battle was over, but the war of legacies would live on, etched not in towers, but in the lives of ordinary Americans. The dust from the hearing had barely settled when the United States Congress moved. What had begun as a verbal duel now crystallized into a resolution. Drafted with urgency, debated with gravity, it carried a title that struck like a drumbeat: Recognition of the Crockett Family Contribution to American Education and Legacy. The chamber, once divided by applause and jeers, now seemed bound by something heavier than partisanship. Lawmakers who had sat silent during Ivanka's attacks now rose to speak of sacrifice, community, and service. When the vote was called, the numbers lit up the board, overwhelming support. The resolution passed. The halls of Congress had given the Crockett name what Ivanka had tried to strip away: official honor. The cameras cut live to the floor. Reporters leaned in, voices low and urgent, narrating the history in real time. It is rare, one anchor whispered on CNN, for Congress to enshrine family contributions in this way. What we are watching is not just legislation, it is vindication. On MSNBC, the commentator's tone sharpened. This is a pivot point. Ivanka Trump walked into that hearing as the golden face of a dynasty. She walks out as the woman who shot her own legacy in the foot. The phrase caught fire: the princess who shot herself. Newspapers splashed it across the front page. Cartoons mocked her misstep, and pundits dissected every second of her unraveling. The analysis was merciless. Editorials described how her calculated arrogance had collapsed into desperation. She confused towers with truth, one columnist wrote, and the moment she dismissed a teacher, she dismissed America itself. Late-night television looped her line about schools not saving the economy, splicing it against Jasmine's calm delivery of documents. The contrast was brutal, one flailing, one unshakable. In living rooms across the country, viewers felt the weight of the shift. Ivanka, once untouchable, now stood as a cautionary tale. But outside the studios, the people had already made their judgment. Millions repeated the words that now echoed across the nation. Your family bought legacy with money. My family wrote it with blood. It was spoken in union halls, whispered in churches, shouted in crowded diners. Farmers repeated it as they worked their fields. Veterans recited it at VFW halls, the line landing like a pledge. Parents told it to their children at dinner tables, their voices heavy with pride. It became more than a sentence, it became a truth stitched into the American spirit. Stories poured in. A firefighter from Pennsylvania posted a video holding up his father's helmet saying, "This is blood, not gold." A nurse in Chicago filmed herself walking out of a night shift whispering, "We write legacy every day. We walk into this hospital." In Louisiana, a grandmother showed her worn Bible saying, "My family didn't leave money. We left faith. That is our blood." Jasmine's words had opened a floodgate. Across the country, ordinary people lifted their own histories into the light, proud to claim what dynasties could never purchase. The education system seized it next. Civic teachers rewrote lesson plans, weaving the hearing into discussions about democracy and sacrifice. Students were asked not about skyscrapers, but about what their families had given to their communities. One classroom assignment read, "Define your legacy, not in money, but in service." In Dallas, children toured the very school built on land once donated by the Crockett family. Teachers pointed to Jasmine's photograph and told a story of how a single hearing redefined what it meant to carry a name. "History is not written by the wealthy alone," one teacher said, "but by ordinary people who put the nation above themselves." The line spread beyond schools into universities. Law professors dissected Jasmine's rhetorical strategy. Political science courses labeled the clash the legacy precedent. Even military academies invoked her words, reminding cadets that service was the cornerstone of any enduring legacy. The nation's young people were being raised on the lesson Ivanka had tried to erase, that history belonged not to the few, but to the many. Still, it was the image of Jasmine herself that carried the deepest resonance. Weeks after the hearing cameras followed her home to Texas. There she gathered a group of students for a field trip. They boarded yellow buses, laughter spilling down the aisles, not fully aware of the weight of where they were going. The ride ended at the Alamo. Under the hot Texas sun, Jasmine walked with the children through the stone walls where her ancestor had stood. The air was heavy with history, the silence broken only by the footsteps of a new generation. At the front of the memorial, Jasmine paused. She looked at the children, their eyes wide, notebooks clutched in their hands. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying the force of the hearing hall. "My mother once told me," she said, "justice is never for sale. Not to the wealthy, not to the powerful. Justice belongs to the people." She looked up at the stone, then back at the students. "Remember, this legacy is not built in towers of glass. It is built in classrooms and communities and courage, and it can never be bought." The children scribbled her words down, some too young to understand fully, others old enough to feel the gravity. Teachers nodded. Veterans in the crowd wiped their eyes. The cameras zoomed in one last time, capturing Jasmine, standing before the Alamo, framed by history and by the future she carried with her. The final shot was not scripted, but it was perfect. Jasmine laid her hand on the stone and whispered her mother's words one more time. "Justice is never for sale." The moment lingered in the silence, as though the walls themselves had heard and agreed. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.